Mr. Chabot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I don't want to repeat what a lot of others have already said, so let me come at it a little bit differently, but I'm sure some of it has already been mentioned. The President, during his State of the Union address last week, called for regulatory reform. I would argue, if you look at the actions from this administration, however, any involvement that they have had relative to regulations has been anything but reform. It's been more and more regulations. And in fact, last year, the Obama administration proposed over $230 billion in new regulatory proposals, which would have, one survey showed that it would have meant another 133 million paperwork hours on businesses. And with that amount of paperwork, it would have taken close to 66,730 additional employees just to comply with the law. And I guess you could argue that, well, there's jobs there, but I think clearly those aren't the type of jobs that are going to make this a more efficient economy and make us more competitive around the world. So I think it's clear that these burdensome regulations really remain a thorn in the side of this economy. And one of the reasons, only one, that we haven't seen the recovery that I think we would have expected. Dr. Jacoby, in your poll, it indicated that government regulation remains the #1 concern for small businesses. And I know one of my colleagues on the other side had another poll that indicated something different. I know I've talked to an awful lot of small businesses in my community, and I hear over and over and over again that government regulations is a big deal. And another one of my colleagues on the other side mentioned a dysfunctional government, and it clearly is that. But I would argue that dysfunction is in the Senate and not in the House. When you look at regulatory reform and getting rid of burdensome regulations, the House has passed something like 30 bills, which are sitting over in the other body, and absolutely nothing is happening over there on these things, or much of anything else. As of last week, they hadn't passed a budget in 1,000 days, which is almost 3 years, despite the fact we're supposed to pass a budget every year, and the House has, but once again, not the Senate. But I think the dysfunction is over in the other body. Dr. Jacoby, if the Senate and this President perhaps would push the Senate into actually passing some of those 27 to 30 bills, and I've got copies and could name what they all are, but I don't want to bore you with all those things. If we actually pass some of this deregulation, getting the government the heck off the backs of these small businesses, would that arguably have a significant effect on small business creation in this country?
There are a couple of different factors, obviously, in that process. What I was trying to talk about was just a freeze, because that, to my mind, would actually have a positive effect immediately. I think when you talk about the others, it's a matter of what's being deregulated and all those details that you talked about. It certainly should have a positive impact. The question is how much depends on, everybody views deregulation differently or regulation differently.
Okay. And also one of my colleagues indicated the tax code being, more than a Bible. And it's actually 8 Bibles stacked on top of each other is how complicated the tax code that both individuals and small businesses have to deal with in this country. What a waste of time that could be more profitably used to better run that business and maybe actually hire some folks. The other thing that I heard over and over again from my small business folks was how tough it is to get access to capital. And one of the things that's been that's attributed to, among other things, is the Dodd-Frank's legislation. What I've been told is, the banks and folks that would lend the money are now, they got the regulators looking over their shoulders even more, and it makes it tougher for them to lend out money, and so the businesses aren't growing. Would anyone want to comment on that, any of the panel members? Yes, sir.
When I spoke, and I understand that maybe he's not subject to Dodd-Frank, but in general what it does is it makes it more of a process than a relationship in lending. And ratios and statistics don't pay loans back. Individuals pay loans back, and it's a matter of honor that you do it. And he thought that regulation, the Dodd-Frank regulation, was changing that dynamic. It was changing it more from a relationship business, which it is, to just a numbers business where, oh, you fell out of our statistical acceptability range, so you got to go. We're calling your loan. We would have been long gone, our company, long gone, early on in our lifetime. I would have lost everything. Lost my house, lost everything. I personally guarantee the debt, and I still do. So I think it moves that. And if we didn't have a relationship, I wouldn't be here today talking about it. So,
Thank
you. If you look back to the period of the boom, I think we did not have effective regulation of the financial system, and that's contributed to the crisis that we got into and contributed heavily to the recession and the unemployment we have now. So I think that was necessary to revisit the regulation of the financial system. I think that Dodd-Frank could have and should have been a bipartisan bill. I think it came very close to being a bipartisan bill, but there was a decision at the end of the day to say, no, we're not going to go along with that. Maybe it would have been a better bill if it had been a bipartisan bill. So I think it's an example of a dysfunctional Congress that we didn't have a bipartisan bill on that. I do think that regulators now are looking over the shoulders of the banks and probably being a little bit too cautious. I think that would have happened with or without Dodd-Frank because, you know, they were on the beach back in 2005 when a lot of these crazy loans were being made.
Mr. Farrar?
Well, I think the answer to your question is yes. I think the Dodd-Frank is one of the components that is perpetuating the lack of any recovery, and I think a fundamental factor too in the credit market is incentives as well. Venture capitalists, for example, they are very sensitive to all these tax burdens, the tax rates, and they do look down the line. So it's hard for companies to get venture capitalists if they think the capital gains rate is going to go up. Historically, that's proven to be a very powerful factor affecting venture capital. And a point about the dysfunctional Congress, I want to note that one very good measure that the House passed is the REINS Act, which would reestablish constitutional control over regulations, and it's something that the other body really needs to move on.
Thank you very much. Yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing.